They say that every forest holds secrets, but this one is different. Deep in its heart, where no light ever reaches, there lies a presence that defies understanding. For generations, villagers have warned anyone who would listen. Never venture into the woods alone, and never, under any circumstances, enter after sunset. The stories are always the same. A shadow that moves just out of sight. A voice calling your name from the darkness, even when you know no one else is there. And if you're foolish enough to follow, you'll never come back the same, if you come back at all. This is the legend of the forest spirit of doom, a name whispered in fear, spoken only when necessary. The spirit, they say, is not bound by time or space. It watches, it waits, and when the moment is right, it strikes. Some believe it's a guardian, protecting something hidden deep within the trees. Others think it's a vengeful force, punishing those who trespass where they don't belong. But no matter who you ask, the answer is always chillingly similar. No one has ever faced the spirit and lived to tell the tale, at least not without leaving a part of themselves behind. For centuries, the warnings have been clear. Don't listen to the voices. Don't look too closely at the shadows. And above all else, never meet its eyes. They say the spirit can see straight into your soul, pulling out your darkest fears and using them against you. Once it has you, there's no escape. These warnings have been passed down through generations, whispered around campfires, and scribbled in journals. And yet, there are always those who think the stories are just that. Stories. Myths created to scare children and keep them from wandering too far. But what if they're not just stories? What if there's truth hidden beneath the fear? In the early 1900s, a group of loggers came to this forest, seeking to carve out a path for progress. They laughed at the villagers' warnings, dismissing them as primitive superstition. They entered the forest, axes in hand, ready to conquer the unknown. Days passed, then weeks. When they didn't return, a search party was sent after them. What they found was unsettling. Their tools were scattered, rusting where they'd fallen. Their campsite was abandoned, as if they'd left in a hurry. And the men themselves? They were never found. The villagers called it a punishment, a warning to those who would disturb the forest's peace. The loggers, they said, had angered the spirit, and the spirit had taken them. But that's just one story. There are countless others, each more chilling than the last. A hiker who ignored the warnings and ventured too deep, only to stumble back days later, his hair turned white from terror. A hunter who swore he saw something following him, something that wasn't human. And the children, always the children, who wander too close to the edge and disappear without a trace. Some say the forest itself is alive, and the spirit is just its avatar, its enforcer. Others believe the spirit is a curse, placed on the land long before anyone can remember. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. This is not a place for the curious or the brave. This is a place for fear. So what would you do if you found yourself here, alone, with no way out, and the growing realization that something is watching you? Would you turn back and run, hoping it's not too late? Or would you stay and face whatever lies within the shadows? Tonight, we'll explore the chilling history of the forest spirit of doom, the stories of those who encountered it, the myths and legends that surround it, and the lingering question, could this spirit still be waiting, deep within the trees, for its next visitor? In the heart of an uncharted forest lies a place untouched by time and shrouded in darkness. Locals call it the Forbidden Thicket, though few dare to speak its name. This is no ordinary forest. It's a place where light struggles to penetrate, where time seems to lose its grip, and where every step deeper feels like a step away from reality. The trees here are unlike any others, their trunks twisted and gnarled as if in perpetual agony. The bark is blackened, almost charred, but not from fire. It's as though the forest itself has been scorched by something far older and far more sinister. The roots snake across the ground, creating treacherous paths almost as if they're trying to trip you, to pull you down into the earth. The air is heavy, damp, and suffocating, carrying with it the scent of decay and something else, something metallic, almost coppery, that lingers on your tongue long after you've inhaled. Every breath feels labored, as if the forest resents your presence, as if it's trying to force you out or break your spirit before you can go any further. And then there's the sound, or rather, the lack of it. At first, it's subtle. The birdsong fades, the rustling of leaves grows quieter, and the distant hum of insects disappears altogether. The deeper you go, the more oppressive the silence becomes. It's not the kind of silence that soothes, it's the kind that screams. It's the kind that makes your heart pound louder in your chest, every beat echoing in your ears like a warning. But the silence doesn't last. The forest has a way of filling the void with something far worse. Whispers. Faint at first, so soft that you might think you're imagining them. But as you continue, they grow louder, more insistent. They're not words you can understand, but they're not random either. They carry a rhythm, a cadence, as if part of an ancient language long forgotten. And then, just as suddenly as they began, they stop, leaving you alone with your thoughts and the suffocating weight of the forest's gaze. Because that's what it feels like. The forest is watching you. Not just from one direction, but from all sides, as if the trees themselves have eyes. It's a sensation that's impossible to shake, no matter how much you try to convince yourself that it's all in your head. Every shadow seems alive, every movement just out of the corner of your eye. You turn, expecting to catch a glimpse of something or someone, but there's nothing there. Just the trees, standing silently, their twisted forms almost mocking your fear. And then there's the cold. It doesn't matter if it's the height of summer. The temperature drops the moment you step foot into the forest. It starts as a chill, a slight discomfort, but as you venture deeper, it becomes unbearable. Your breath fogs in front of you, your fingers grow numb, and the cold seems to seep into your very bones. It's not the kind of cold you can escape with a jacket or a fire. It's alive, moving with you, wrapping itself around you like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Locals speak of this cold with a mixture of fear and reverence. They believe it's the spirit itself, a manifestation of its presence. It's not there to harm you. Not yet, at least. It's there to warn you, to remind you that you don't belong, that you're trespassing on sacred ground. But if you ignore the warning, if you push further despite the chill biting at your skin and the whispers gnawing at your sanity, the forest will take action. The stories of what happens next are as varied as they are horrifying. Some speak of being paralyzed, unable to move as the shadows close in around them. Others describe a sudden and overwhelming urge to run, though they're never quite sure what they're running from. And then there are those who claim to have seen it, the spirit itself. They say it doesn't appear all at once. At first, it's just a shape in the distance, indistinct and almost human. But the closer it gets, the more wrong it becomes. One man, a hunter named Jack, swore he saw the spirit during a desperate attempt to track a missing child. He described it as a figure cloaked in shadows, its form constantly shifting, never solid. But what haunted him most were its eyes. They weren't eyes at all, he said, but two glowing voids that seemed to pull him in, stripping away every thought, every memory, until all that was left was fear. He was found days later, wandering the edge of the forest, muttering incoherently. He never spoke of it again. And then there's the story of a woman named Jessica, a healer who entered the forest to gather rare herbs. She was known for her courage and her skepticism of the old legends. But when she emerged 3 days later, she was a changed woman. Her hair, once jet black, had turned stark white. Her hands trembled as she clutched a bundle of herbs, and her eyes darted nervously as if she was being watched even in the safety of her home. She never returned to the forest, and she never told anyone what she saw. But she warned anyone who would listen. The spirit isn't just a tale. It's real, and it's waiting. Perhaps the most chilling detail about the Forbidden Thicket is the way it seems to call to people. Those who live near it often describe an inexplicable pull, a curiosity that borders on obsession. They dream of the forest, of its shadows and its whispers. They wake up with the feeling that they need to go, that something is waiting for them, and some do. They leave in the dead of night, slipping past the village boundaries and disappearing into the trees. They never return. The elders say this is the spirit's true power. It doesn't just haunt the forest, it reaches beyond it, planting seeds of fear and curiosity in the minds of those who stray too close. It knows how to lure its victims, how to draw them in until they're too far gone to turn back. And once you're in its grasp, there's no escape. Not really. Because even if you make it out alive, the forest never truly lets you go. The forest spirit of doom is more than a myth, more than a cautionary tale whispered to frighten the reckless or the curious. It is a story etched into the very fabric of the land, retold with chilling reverence across generations. Its origins, they say, stretch back to a time when the world was ruled not by men, but by forces far older, far more powerful, and far less forgiving. Long before the forest earned its sinister reputation, it was a sacred place, a sanctuary revered by an ancient tribe whose name has long since been erased from history. They were known only as the Forest Keepers, a people who lived in perfect harmony with the wilderness, treating it not as a resource to be exploited, but as a living, breathing entity deserving of respect. The Keepers believed that the forest was protected by a guardian spirit, a being they called Evoke. This spirit was no mere apparition. It was a force of nature, an embodiment of balance and justice. Neither benevolent nor malevolent, Evoke ensured that the delicate equilibrium between humanity and the natural world was maintained. The people worshipped Evoke with fervent devotion. They built altars deep within the woods, adorned with carvings that depicted the spirit as a towering figure, cloaked in shadow and crowned with antlers. Offerings were made regularly, baskets of fruits, bundles of herbs, and intricate crafts fashioned from wood and stone. The most sacred rituals took place under the light of the full moon, when the tribe gathered in silence to honor the spirit with chants and dances. For centuries, this bond between the keepers and the forest remained unbroken. But peace, as history so often proves, is fleeting. As neighboring tribes grew envious of the keepers' prosperity, conflicts erupted. The forest, once a symbol of unity and abundance, became a battleground. Trees were felled to build weapons and fortifications, and the sacred altars were desecrated in acts of spite and desperation. The keepers, overwhelmed and outnumbered, were forced to abandon their rituals, their altars, and ultimately, their reverence for the forest. The betrayal did not go unnoticed. The first signs were subtle, almost dismissible. Animals that had once lived peacefully among the trees began to act erratically. Deer, usually timid creatures, turned aggressive, charging at anyone who ventured too close. Birds, once harbingers of joy with their melodic songs, now screeched ominously, their calls echoing like warnings across the canopy. The trees themselves seemed to wither, their leaves curling and blackening as if consumed by an invisible fire. And then came the sickness. A strange, unexplainable illness began to sweep through the keeper's village. It started with fatigue, an overwhelming weariness that no amount of rest could cure. Then came the fevers, the hallucinations, and finally, the silence. Those afflicted would wander into the forest, drawn by some unseen force, only to vanish without a trace. Desperate to understand what was happening, the tribe's elders turned to the old stories, the ancient chants they had long abandoned. They realized too late that the balance had been broken, and that Evoke, the spirit they had once revered, had become something else entirely. They say the transformation was not instantaneous. Evoke did not become vengeful overnight. It was a gradual descent, spurred by centuries of neglect, desecration, and betrayal. The spirit, once a guardian of harmony, became a hunter of souls. It began to feed on fear, drawing strength from the terror it inspired. And with each life it claimed, its power grew, entwining itself with the forest until the two were indistinguishable. Evoke was no longer a spirit of balance. It was a spirit of doom. The legend of Evoke spread far and wide, carried on the whispers of those who lived near the forest's edge. The stories varied in their details, but the core remained the same. A vengeful spirit bound to a cursed forest, luring the unwary to their doom. Some said it appeared as a towering figure cloaked in shadow, its form constantly shifting, impossible to fully comprehend. Others described it as a pair of glowing eyes, watching from the darkness, always just out of reach. But the most chilling accounts were those that spoke of its voice, a low, resonant sound that seemed to echo not through the air, but directly within the minds of those who heard it. Those who dared to enter the forest often reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the very ground beneath their feet was rejecting their presence. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the air grew colder with each step deeper into the woods. But the most unnerving phenomenon was the whispers. Soft at first, barely audible, they would grow louder, more insistent, until they seemed to come from all directions at once. Some claimed the whispers were Oroka's way of luring its victims deeper, while others believed they were the cries of those who had already fallen prey to the spirit, doomed to wander the forest for eternity. One of the most famous accounts of the spirit's wrath comes from a traveling merchant named Dala. According to the story, Dala was warned repeatedly by the villagers not to venture into the forest, especially after dusk. But Dala, driven by greed and a tight schedule, ignored their warnings. He entered the forest under the light of a full moon, his cart laden with goods. Days passed, and when Dala failed to arrive at his destination, a search party was organized. What they found was chilling. The cart, abandoned in the middle of a clearing, its contents untouched. Nearby, they discovered a circle of footprints, as if Dala had been walking in circles for hours. Of the merchant himself, there was no sign. The villagers took this as further proof of the spirit's power. They began to leave offerings at the forest's edge once more, hoping to appease Oroka and prevent further disappearances. But the offerings did little to stem the tide of strange occurrences. Travelers continued to vanish, and those who returned spoke of shadowy figures, disembodied voices, and a chilling sense that they were being watched. The most unsettling aspect of the legend, perhaps, is its persistence. While other myths and stories fade with time, the tale of Oroka remains as vivid and haunting as ever. It is a story that refuses to be forgotten, a constant reminder of the consequences of betrayal and the power of nature's wrath. The forest still stands, a dark and looming presence on the horizon. And though the villagers rarely speak of it openly, the warnings remain. Never enter the forest after dusk. Never speak ill of the woods. And if you hear the whispers, run. Not all who venture into the forest are lost forever, but those who return come back changed. Their faces are pale, their eyes hollow, and their words stumble out as fragments of horror-stricken memories. Take, for instance, the account of Marcus, a trader known for his stoic demeanor. He was no foolhardy adventurer, but a man of logic and reason, grounded in his belief that myths were nothing more than exaggerations. Marcus entered the forest one late afternoon, intent on charting a shortcut to expedite his trade route. What should have been a day's journey turned into a week-long ordeal. When he finally staggered into the village on the 7th day, his boots were torn, his clothes tattered, and his face covered in scratches, as though he had clawed at his own skin in desperation. He spoke of footsteps that followed him, always just behind him, no matter how fast he walked or how often he stopped to confront the sound. The footsteps never quickened, never slowed, but matched his pace exactly, creating an agonizing rhythm that seemed to drill into his mind. It wasn't just the footsteps, Marcus whispered to the gathered villagers, his voice trembling. It was the breathing. Heavy, labored, like something dragging itself through the underbrush. I turned so many times. I called out, shouted at whatever was following me, but there was nothing. Always nothing. The villagers pressed him for more details, but Marcus would only shake his head, his gaze fixed on some unseen horror. He left the village the next morning, refusing to stay another night so close to the forest, and was never seen again. And then there's the chilling disappearance of Edward Grayson, a seasoned woodsman who prided himself on his ability to navigate even the densest forests. Grayson was hired by a wealthy landowner to retrieve a rare herb that supposedly grew deep within the forbidden thicket. Confident in his skills, he ventured into the woods with a small pack of supplies, promising to return within 2 days. When 3 days passed without word, the landowner organized a search party. They combed the forest's outskirts, calling Grayson's name and marking trees to avoid getting lost themselves. It wasn't long before they found his pack, neatly placed at the base of an ancient oak tree. His belongings were undisturbed: a water flask, a knife, a small notebook filled with precise sketches of the flora he had encountered. But there was no sign of Grayson. The search party pressed on, their unease growing with every step. Hours later, they stumbled upon another chilling find: a circle of ash on the forest floor, perfectly round, as though scorched by an invisible flame. In the center of the circle lay Grayson's boots, arranged neatly side by side, but no other trace of him was ever found. The villagers were left to speculate. Some believed the spirit had claimed Grayson as its own, while others whispered that the circle of ash was a warning, a line no one should cross. Perhaps the most harrowing account comes from a young couple, Henry and Clara, who foolishly decided to camp near the edge of the forest, dismissing the legends as old wives' tales. Their night began uneventfully, with a crackling fire and laughter echoing under the stars. But as the hours stretched on, an unnatural silence settled over the area. The usual sounds of nocturnal life, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, vanished, replaced by an oppressive stillness. Clara later recounted the moment she first noticed the whispers. Faint and indistinct at first, they seemed to rise and fall with the breeze, carrying fragments of words she couldn't quite understand. Henry, trying to reassure her, laughed it off as the wind playing tricks on their ears. But as the whispers grew louder, more insistent, even he could no longer dismiss them. The couple retreated into their tent, hoping to block out the sound. But the whispers followed them, seeming to come from inside the tent itself. And then, just as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. Henry peeked outside, finding nothing but the dark, impenetrable forest. But what happened next chilled Clara to her core. A single, low voice called her name from the trees. Not Henry's voice, but something deeper, raspier, and impossibly familiar. "Clara?" it repeated, drawing out the syllables. She screamed, and Henry grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the car. They abandoned their belongings and drove through the night, not stopping until they reached the safety of their home. In the weeks that followed, Clara claimed she could still hear the voice calling her name, sometimes in her dreams, sometimes in the quiet moments of the day. It was as though the forest had marked her, refusing to let her forget. These stories, though terrifying, pale in comparison to the tale of the search party that ventured into the forest to rescue a missing boy. Their accounts would send shivers down the spine of even the bravest listener. They followed the boys' tracks deep into the woods, finding them abruptly ending near a stream. But what they discovered next left them frozen in fear. A single child-sized handprint pressed into the trunk of a tree. It was charred, as though burned into the bark, and surrounded by the faint outline of what could only be described as antlers. The rescue mission was called off, and the villagers, terrified, decided to seal off the forest's entrance with a crude wooden fence. They knew it wouldn't stop the spirit, but perhaps it would serve as a reminder, a barrier between the living and the cursed. Yet, the spirit doesn't need the forest to reach you, they say. All it needs is your fear. So tell me, would you dare step closer to the forbidden thicket? Or do you already hear the whispers calling your name? The stories had always described the forest spirit as solitary, a lone specter guarding its domain. But the truth was far more horrifying. One fateful winter, a group of researchers ventured into the forbidden thicket, determined to prove or disprove the legend once and for all. The team consisted of three: Dr. William Carter, a seasoned anthropologist fascinated by folklore; Emily Harlow, a botanist drawn by the forest's unique and uncharted ecosystem; and Thomas Reed, a videographer tasked with documenting the journey. Armed with cutting-edge equipment and skepticism, they entered the woods just as the first snow began to fall. For the first few hours, the group remained focused on their objectives. Dr. Carter recorded the villagers' warnings in his notebook, while Emily collected samples of strange, luminescent moss growing on the bark of twisted trees. Thomas trailed behind, capturing everything through his lens. But as they ventured deeper, subtle signs of the forest's hostility began to emerge. Their compass needles spun wildly, rendering navigation impossible. The air grew colder than it should have, and the snowflakes seemed to fall slower, as if time itself were distorted. The group began to hear faint murmurs, too quiet to make out but persistent enough to unsettle them. Then, at twilight, they found the first sign. It was a clearing littered with objects, rusted tools, tattered clothing, and trinkets that looked decades, if not centuries, old. Among them lay a single, worn-out journal. Dr. Carter opened it carefully, its pages brittle with age. The handwriting was erratic, desperate. "Do not follow the light. It is not what it seems. The shadows have eyes. We are never alone." The entries ended abruptly, the last page smeared with what looked like blood. Emily urged the group to leave, but Dr. Carter insisted they press on, convinced they were on the verge of a groundbreaking discovery. Reluctantly, they continued. Night fell quickly, faster than they anticipated. The dense canopy overhead blocked out the moonlight, plunging them into near-total darkness. They lit their lanterns, their beams barely piercing the oppressive gloom. That's when they saw it. The figure. It stood at the edge of their light, impossibly tall and unnervingly still. Its antlers stretched high into the canopy, twisting like the branches of the ancient trees. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with warmth, but with an otherworldly coldness. The creature's form was indistinct, as if it were made of shadows and smoke, constantly shifting, never fully solid. For a moment, no one moved. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if summoned by some unseen force, the whispers began again, louder this time, more insistent. They weren't coming from the figure, but from the trees, the air, the very ground beneath their feet. Dr. Carter stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overpowering his fear. He raised his hand, as if to communicate. The creature tilted its head, almost human-like, as if it were observing him in return. But then, it moved. It wasn't a step or a glide. It was as if the shadows themselves carried it closer, dissolving and reforming in an instant. The air grew heavier, colder, and the whispers turned to anguished cries. The team realized then that the spirit wasn't alone. Surrounding the figure were faint, ghostly shapes, faces, arms, and forms flickering in and out of existence. These were the souls it had claimed, tethered to it for eternity. They reached out, their translucent hands clawing at the air, their mouths open in silent screams. Emily screamed and bolted, her instinct for survival overriding everything else. Thomas followed, dropping his camera in the chaos. Dr. Carter, however, was transfixed, unable to move as the spirit loomed over him. What happened next remains unclear, pieced together only from the fragmented accounts of Emily and Thomas. Emily claimed she heard Dr. Carter's voice crying out, not in fear, but in awe, as if he had seen something too profound to describe. Thomas, running behind her, swore he saw the spirit's form engulf Carter, the antlers wrapping around him like a cage before he disappeared into the darkness. When they finally escaped the forest, battered and frostbitten, the two survivors were incoherent, speaking in disjointed sentences about what they had witnessed. It wasn't just a spirit, Emily whispered. It was everything. Every fear, every regret, every lost soul. It was all of them, all at once. Authorities organized a search party to recover Dr. Carter, but they found nothing. No body, no tracks, not even the camera Thomas had dropped. The clearing with the trinkets had vanished, as if the forest itself had swallowed it whole. Months later, Emily and Thomas recounted their story to a journalist, but their accounts differed in subtle yet unnerving ways. Emily described the spirit's antlers as jagged and sharp, while Thomas insisted they were smooth and twisted. Both, however, agreed on one thing. The glowing eyes, cold and unrelenting, seemed to see through them, as if exposing every secret they had ever kept. And so, the legend of the forest spirit of doom grew even darker. It wasn't just a guardian or a predator, it was something far worse, an ancient force that fed on fear, loss, and the very essence of those who dared to cross its path. As you listen to this tale, ask yourself, could you withstand its gaze? Or would you too become part of the legend? The forest spirit of doom remains a story passed down through generations, its details shifting like the shadows beneath the canopy. Some call it folklore, a cautionary tale to keep wanderers from venturing too far into the unknown. Others, however, believe it to be far more than that, a manifestation of the forest itself, alive and vengeful. As the years passed, more expeditions were launched, and yet the forest kept its secrets. Those brave or foolish enough to enter often returned with tales that defied logic. A seasoned hiker once described feeling the weight of invisible eyes tracking his every move, though he saw no sign of life. Another explorer recounted hearing faint cries of help that led him in circles until he collapsed in exhaustion. Then there are those who never came back. Their stories are pieced together from the items left behind. A torn scarf snagged on a branch, a shattered phone screen lying in the dirt, or in one particularly chilling instance, a half-written journal found in the hollow of an ancient tree. Its final entry read, "It's not just a legend, I've seen it, and now it sees me." Skeptics dismiss these accounts as mere hallucinations brought on by fear, exhaustion, or the forest's natural disorienting properties. Psychologists point to pareidolia, the brain's tendency to perceive patterns like faces or figures in random shapes. They argue that the swirling mist and shifting light can easily trick the mind into seeing things that aren't there. But can hallucinations explain the eerie consistencies in these reports? How do you account for the missing persons, the whispers that more than one person has heard, or the artifacts that seem to vanish into thin air? These questions linger, unanswered, gnawing at the edges of reason. A cryptic note left by a villager decades ago only deepened the mystery. Carved into a wooden post at the forest's edge, it read, "Beware the stillness. It means it's near." Even today, the Forbidden Thicket draws thrill-seekers and researchers alike, despite, or perhaps because of, the risks. A few have claimed to capture blurry images of a tall, shadowy figure in the distance, its antlers barely distinguishable from the surrounding trees. Others bring recording equipment, hoping to capture the infamous whispers, but they return with nothing but static. And yet, the forest always seems to leave its mark. Survivors speak of dreams that plague them for weeks afterward. Dreams of being watched, of wandering endlessly through a labyrinth of trees, of glowing eyes that pierce through the darkness. Some wake up with scratches on their arms, others with the faint scent of moss clinging to their clothes, as if the forest followed them home. So, is the forest spirit of doom still out there, haunting the woods? Or has it ever truly existed at all? Those who venture into its depths often ask themselves this very question. But perhaps the real mystery lies in why so many are drawn to the forest in the first place. Is it curiosity, a need for answers, or something deeper, something primal, pulling them toward the unknown? If you were to stand at the forest's edge, with the wind whispering through the trees and the shadows shifting just out of reach, would you dare to take a step forward? Would you have the courage to face what lies beyond, or the wisdom to turn back before it's too late? Because those who enter never return unchanged. Whether they bring back stories, scars, or nothing at all, one thing is certain. The forest remembers, and it watches, silently waiting for its next visitor. So the question remains, is the forest spirit of doom merely a tale to keep us away from the dangers of the wilderness, or is it something much darker, something alive, ancient, and eternal? And if it does exist, one must wonder, what does it want? Perhaps the answer lies in the silence between the whispers, in the stillness that warns of its presence. Or perhaps it is a question best left unanswered. As we close this tale, remember this: legends often carry a seed of truth. Whether myth or reality, the Forbidden Thicket stands as a reminder of how little we truly understand about the world around us. So the next time you find yourself walking through the woods, tread carefully. You never know who or what might be watching. As we close the chapter on the forest spirit of doom, we leave you with a question that haunts us all. Was it merely a legend? Or is there something far darker lurking beneath the trees? The stories are compelling, the evidence unsettling, and the mystery never fully explained. So, what do you think? Is the forest spirit of doom real, or is it just a tale spun from the shadows of the past? Maybe you've experienced something similar, or maybe you know of another legend that's even more chilling. Whatever your thoughts, we want to hear from you. Share your theories and experiences in the comments below, and let's continue the conversation. And if you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more terrifying tales from the world's darkest corners, and ring the bell to make sure you never miss a new story. The world is full of mysteries, legends, and truths that are just waiting to be uncovered. So until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, the forest is always watching.